Previously, 6 steps from Scrum to Scrumban. Today, a canal, 2 swans, a rain shower, and a big pile of your comments.
Hi, my name is Gary Strawn. Welcome to Development That Pays and welcome to the Grand Union Canal, one of my favourite destinations for a Saturday morning bike ride. But this Saturday, I've swapped my Lycra for a jacket because I thought we'd try a little bit of an outside broadcast. So let's get this thing started. So I've moved just a little bit away from the canal to get away from the canal side traffic and taken a couple of steps closer to Heathrow Airport. I don't know if you can hear in the background a plane taking off. So not ideal for my outside broadcast, but I'm going to carry on like the trooper that I am. So that video, Scrum to Scrumban. Well, I never really know how a video is going to go down, but that one in particular was a concern. Not least because, in a way, it's attacking a bit of a sacred cow. Not all of us are ready to even consider moving away from Scrum. So I wasn't sure of the reaction that I would get. I wasn't really sure I'd get any reaction at all. But here I have printout of all of the comments that came in. As you can see, I don't know if you can see, I've scribbled over quite a lot of them, which gave me a challenge of how to structure this particular video, because I do want to address most of the comments that came in. So I think the logical sequence is probably, just chuck that to one side, is probably to stick with this. This is the Scrum to Scrumban cheat sheet. You will find a link to this in the description right below this video. It's not free, I shall tell you that straight away. It will cost you an email address, and one of the reasons I ask for an email address is so that I can send you updates if and when a mistake is spotted. And you guys out there are very good at spotting mistakes. Turns out that the very first issue of the Scrum to Scrumban cheat sheet had a little bit of a howler right at the bottom, arguably the most important line on the entire thing. Congratulations, you're now doing Scumban. So yes, if you don't already have a copy of this, it might be good to go and grab it now, print it off and follow right along. Step 1 on the journey from Scrum to Scrumban is visualize the work, and I don't think I got any comments directly on that subject, so let's move swiftly on to step 2, which is impose WIP limits. Again, perhaps surprisingly, I think most people are comfortable with the idea of limiting WIP. Ruby Rose Evenstar had this question, one question about WIP limits. What do you do with tickets that are blocked from an external team you don't have control over? So if the item really is blocked and can't be moved along, then I think we have no choice to remove it from this area. One or two people suggested having a dedicated column for blocked items, and that might be the easiest if you're using some kind of an electronic board like Jira. What I like to do is maintain the state or the position moving left to right on the board, even for items that are blocked. So I prefer blocked items to be in a separate swim lane. Either way, the column or the process that we're interested in, space is created inside and the pull system can operate once again. Moving on again, the third step on the road from Scrum to Scrumban was to add more columns. Now, I've advocated for a long time for multiple columns on a board. Basically, as many as the team think is appropriate is the number that I think should be on the board. But there's a comment here from Vincent Lord that raises a cautionary note that I confess I hadn't really thought of before. There's a real danger in having multiple teams within a single team, each having their own requirements before they will work on something. So I think that the message is that the additional columns can in some way build walls between sub-teams that appear within the team. This feels like it's something we should really dive into in a separate episode. Wow, the sun's come out. I wasn't really expecting that. Let's move along and find a shadier nook. Okay, I found myself a shady nook just beside the top lock of Hanwell Locks. And I think we've got to the fourth step, which was to stop early binding and to start ordering. Plenty of things to talk about in this step. The Emperor 80 had this to say: what is a developer supposed to do while pulling a ticket from dev that he or she is just not able to do because of lack of skill? Should the developer work on the second item? This is a question I've asked myself on many an occasion because as I am a developer, it quite often happens that I go to pick an item from the top of the pile and find out it's one that I know will take me an absolute age to do. So I'm very aware of the temptation to pick from the second list. So I suppose the purest answer is you should take the first one. The pragmatic answer is that you might agree with the team that you might pick the second one, perhaps even the third. Actually, we had another really good answer to the question from Pinecone Defense, one that I like a lot. We had this exact issue in our recent move from Scrum to Kanban. We did a balance of the two approaches, prioritizing the former if it involved very little training and support. And this is the bit I really like. We found team members were able to take on a much broader range of tasks relatively quickly with less skill development and cross-training than before. I wasn't expecting the sun, but I wasn't expecting rain either. Cue some nice B-roll of water falling on a canal.
All dried off and back under cover. Those outside broadcasts are trickier than they look. I didn't even get a chance to show you one of my favourite bits on the canal. The 3 bridges. Road bridge above, railway line beneath, aqueduct right through the middle. And designed by none other than Isambard Kingdom Brunel. It was his very last project. He died just a few weeks after its completion. But I digress. Back to the action with step 5, stop estimating. I'm sure it won't surprise you to learn that this section generated most of the column inches, and Santosh spoke for many of you when he asked these 4 questions. How do you time box your sprint when you don't do sprint planning in Scrumban? You don't. Estimation, what about that? It's complicated. Is there a concept of velocity in Scrumban? How do you calculate it? Velocity is usually expressed as story points per sprint, and since in Scrumban we don't have either of those things, how do you track your burn downs? You don't. On a slightly more serious note, we don't estimate just for the sake of it. There has to be some kind of tangible output. And yes, of course, there is a direct output. There's also an indirect output that many of you are concerned about losing. But let's start with the obvious one, the direct result of estimating. Adriano had this to say: how can I have predictability towards stakeholders as there is no clear sprint planning? And this from Aidan: I agree that it would be difficult to remove estimating without finding an alternative to forecasting. So if you don't have estimates, can you still have predictability? A couple of you provided a clue. Chris said, regarding velocity, you could argue that the number of work items completed per week, month, quarter is a team's velocity. Though traditionally measured in story points, it doesn't have to be. Very interesting. Velocity can still be determined as it is based on the speed in which the work is done and doesn't necessarily need to be baselined by estimation. You can get predictability without estimating, and you do so by counting stories rather than by counting story points. Clearly, there's more to it than that, and it deserves an episode all on its own, which we will get to in the very near future. Should you be watching this video in the very near future, then there may be a link to it up here. But if you've been quick off the mark, there won't be. Sorry about that. Before we move on, let's talk about the side benefits of estimates, or rather, the side benefits of the process of estimating. Wouter had this to say: "Personally, I've always thought of estimating as an indicator of whether you need more detail in your stories or not. If stories are given high estimates, chances are they are not clear enough or can be split into multiple stories." And Paul had this to say: "The bit where I do have a problem is the stopping of estimating, and it's not necessarily the estimating bit that I disagree with the most. Grooming, as we know it's called in Scrum, I prefer to call it refining and estimating, is the most underrated ceremony of all. But it's actually critical in the team's arsenal of dealing with the complexity and uncertainty, and therefore risk, than they face when it comes to actually delivering the stories they commit to." Wouter and Paul, I'm completely with you. I've long thought that the least important outcome from a planning poker session is actually the number of story points to assign to a ticket. Far more important is the discussion that precedes it. The message, I think, is clear. If we're going to be transitioning from Scrum to Scrumban, we must make sure not to throw out the baby with the bathwater. We need to retain that all-important discussion. And on the subject of baby and bathwater, Marion had a concern. Does Lean recognise value added with review and retrospective? As I hope I said in the previous episode, a team would be wise to retain the ritual that is the retrospective. And Pablo echoed the thought. I also agree with the comments about retaining retrospectives. We've made it at long last to the final step. It seems a long time since I was caught in the rain. You know, this outside broadcast was originally planned to be done here. It's a place where you can rely on the weather a bit more than here in Old Blighty. Step 6. Trigger planning. In case we were in any doubt at all, Chris has the news. A just-in-time sprint planning event defeats the point of the Scrum time box. I'm not arguing that it's not valuable. I'm just saying that when you depart from fixed-length time box, sprint, you've broken Scrum. Guilty as charged. We are well and truly into Scrumban, and we've left Scrum behind. And Wilson liked the look of it. Great video. Thanks for sharing. The triggered planning is definitely a game changer. If you're watching this video, the chances are you are doing Scrum, but I wondered if any of you were doing Scrumban. I was pleasantly surprised. This is essentially what we're doing in my team, but without knowing that someone had already attempted to describe it and codify it. How about that? I'm already doing some kind of Scrumban with my team. I started by not doing sprints anymore and estimating using ticket count. We became quite demanding about ticket splitting. I tried to break down more complex stories into many smaller ones, and this way we kept some kind of predictability. Yet another clue about how to use story counting for predictability. Mikkel went on to say that after migrating to this approach, I missed planning poker and estimation. When we, the team, estimate some tasks, we are encouraged to think deeper about the problem. Yes, exactly. That's why it's important to maintain that discussion step. And this one's from Pinecone Defense. This very much mirrors what we did with our teams. And here's a couple of sentences that I really like. In the first 2 weeks, teams tried to keep early binding and the sprint schedule. By week 3, they gave up, started focusing on unblocking work, triggered by the new WIP limit, and started shoving work out the door like there's no tomorrow. We're 5 weeks in to a fairly Scrum-banish Kanban, and no one wants to go back. How's that for a success story? And this one from Chan Flo. I moved my 2 development teams to Scrumban almost a year ago. The team loved the more structured way of dealing with priorities without breaking a sprint commitment and swarming on bottlenecks. The feature manager loved it because he knew that newly discovered information would be worked quickly since we let him have input on the prioritization of the backlog. And listen to this. Although the rest of the project, about 13 teams, are still working Scrum, I've partnered with some of the other Scrum Masters to understand how Scrumban can work for their teams. Fantastic. And that's a fabulous note, I think, to end on today. Thank you very much indeed for all of your comments. My apologies if I didn't manage to work yours in. Question of the day, having watched this episode, are you more or less likely to give Scrumban a try in your team? Let me know in the comments below. And it only remains for me to thank you very much for watching. I look forward to seeing you next time. Cheers for now.